Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are here for another one of your questions about work. And for those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. And we have with us, I'm going to burn your ears a little bit, Claire, even though we're like just getting to talking. One of the people who is the giants of how leadership and management work in the tech industry and has been at some wildly successful companies on the boards of other names but is now a corporate officer and advisor at Stripe. Claire Hughes Johnson was COO there for many years, and at Google before that, working on many of the products you all use and know and love, and has written a book about the practice of scaling. And we're kind of working this out beforehand. This is one of these odd moments for scaling because, when the wind's at your back, like I got lots of problems about how to scale, but when the wind's in your face, what do you do? So today's question, and thank you for joining us, is how can I be an effective leader after a layoff?
Yeah, well, Roy, thank you for having me. And I guess it's not surprising I'm getting this question a lot. You are probably also.
I get more like, should I lay people off? And if so, how? And secret whisper, I've never fired anybody. So like, how do I do this? So,
right. And then you have to talk about the firing versus the layoff. Those are not the same things. Stuff. And there's so much there. But yes, I'm getting this question. And my reflection is we're really in an age of anxiety right now. There's just a ton, whether that's because of layoffs happening or the macro political environment, you name it. And I think that as you're right, scaling, my book is called Scaling People, Tactics for Management and Company Building. And I think everyone immediately thinks scaling is about growth. And certainly I've had the opportunity to be in very high growth environments, but actually I think the book is more applicable now. It's more applicable because it's really about fundamentals of leadership and management.
And by the way, if people want it, we're just going to leave this up while we talk for a minute. Yeah, no, just so folks can find it from the beautifully published Stripe Press. But sorry, keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I think one of the, actually a story I don't talk about in the book is when I was at Google in 2008. You may recall there was more of now compared to now, but a bit of an economic moment. Lehman Brothers collapsed, actually. Sure. The day that I came back from maternity leave into a giant new job, Roy. And I all of a sudden was faced with a more executive role and a Google leadership team who was pretty worried about the way the numbers were going to look and what was sort of the unknown. I ended up doing a layoff, which until recently, Google had not done much of. And I think the most important thing I did in that moment, by the way, was travel. So to every sort of office that I could get to quickly and talk directly to the team. And then also do an all hands that we broadcast. I had a global, pretty big team at that point. And really own it. Own the decision, own the thinking, explain, be empathetic about, actually, I think one of the most important messages is, yeah, it's really hard. We've had to say goodbye to colleagues, but you know what? Let's do them proud. Let's get past this. And that is what I would say I would kind of end with is like, you really need to send a message of empathy, acknowledgement. This was a decision. This is difficult. And now we are going to move forward.
And so I have a bunch of questions about that. How, the crying CEO doing the layoff has become like a meme, right? And so and at the same time, you're a human being. It's obviously difficult for you, especially like you were at home creating the most important startup in your family. And then you come to this like big company where you have an expanded role and you are empathetic. And at the same time, it's nowhere near as hard for you as it is for the people who you've just axed. And so how did you find yourself navigating being authentic in an environment that's also one of the things I find is hard in an age of anxiety is a lot of things, especially in big organizations, become very legally charged. Like the HR people and lawyers, maybe who may have reported to you, start showing up and saying, don't use this turn of phrase.
Don't say
and then all of a sudden it's like, well, my capacity to be human starts to feel circumscribed. And so I'm just curious how you navigated that.
Yeah, I mean, I get the legal advice, Roy, but I'm never going to stop being a human leader who's pretty authentic and like
ignore it basically when you need to.
I think that's thank you. You said it, not me, but yes, I think that's true. And I actually
I hope the general
found,
counsels I work with are not listening to this. But yeah, I mean, oftentimes the question is just what is the liability that you're protecting yourself from? And lawyers will protect, that's their job, to protect from small chances. And so.
right, but you sometimes need to take those risks. And honestly, I don't think, I mean, what comes to my mind in making a human connection is, yeah, sure, I still have my job. And sure, I'm the more highly paid leader who gets to keep my job. And you need to keep that in the front of your mind, because your perspective can get out of whack when you accumulate power, which I don't really think of, but it happens, right? But I think that the thing that I've talked about to teams is when I worked in consulting, and again, this is dating myself, but in the sort of early 2000s, there was what people would call a .com sort of bust.
I graduated from college into the first .com bust, so I
Right.
remember.
So we're in the bust, and I worked in this consulting firm that was sort of a startup-y consulting firm and had a technology arm to it. And we had a layoff, and I distinctly remember, Roy, coming into the office because it was consulting. So we'd come in on Friday after traveling to the client.
Monday to Thursday. I lived the life too.
We had these cubicles that were a terrible design, by the way. They're all facing each other. So if you're on the phone, like you're talking to your colleague, whatever, they're all facing each other. And my whole cubicle group was gone. Because you don't know. This is the other thing. You don't know who was affected. And it was really stark. And I go back to that story and I say, yeah, I may be the leader now. I may have even been part of the layoff decision. I've also been the survivor, if you think of it that way, in another moment where it was all my colleagues and many of my friends. And people kind of, if you're telling that story authentically, people feel that I can go back in that moment and I feel it.
Yeah.
I feel the sort of isolation and back to uncertainty. And I think about then as a leader, what do I need to provide? I need to provide accountability and ownership. I own this. I
just want to make sure I know what you mean when you say that, because you said it before. What I think I hear you saying is you explicitly identifying that the responsibility for the choice lies with you. Is that what you mean?
Yes. I think you need to really own it on behalf of the company. In the case of Google, it wasn't all my decision, but I did make some of the decisions and I executed on it. And I certainly was watching my own bottom line and realizing like, I can't deliver my numbers this quarter. Right. And I had to own that. And I think, and we had just hired a bunch of people, right? Brutal. You just hire a bunch of new people and you say, oh, and goodbye. Right. Which was happening, happens a lot in tech. You're growing quickly and then you're not. And so I think really owning that decision and then connecting with how people feel in that moment and then saying, okay, we got to do better than this. We got to move on. And being really a source of stability and consistency, Roy, honestly. And I think this is one of the challenges in these moments of high anxiety is everybody's reading into everything, right? What's in your calendar, what your travel plans are.
I saw you wore purple today.
I don't know. It feels like people are looking, they're reading in, they're looking for, there's some conspiracy theories running around. And your job is to be really show up, be consistent, and actually probably communicate more than you're used to, which feels uncomfortable because you're kind of not sure. Often these are times of anxiety for you as a leader. You're like, well, I don't even know, but better to say something, even if it's to say, I know you have questions. I don't have all the answers, but here's what we do know. And we're going to focus on these things we do know. These are the levers that work. We're going to pull these levers. And then hopefully you're able to then mark progress. And you want to almost over highlight progress in these moments coming out of a layoff because that's what people need to feel traction, positive traction.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that there is that natural human desire to hide in those moments.
Oh, yeah.
And I think there's something physical about it too, of like, are you visible to people? And it probably applies to crisis management generally. And so I guess this is what you meant by conspiracy theory around every corner, is anticipating that literally everybody you're talking to is like, well, is this really because the company's going to get sold? Or, whatever outlandish things there are. Well, they're setting this up so they can do the big layoff in 6 months. And as an executive in a company, I've definitely had the experience of sometimes you're not privy to all the choices that may surround you. And so you have to represent some of them as best you can. And so owning it while saying there's some stuff you don't know.
Right. Well, I think that to me is the most important, is set expectations. There's things I know, there's things I don't know. I think some of you expect that I know more than I do.
Right. Is the economy going to turn around? It's like, I don't know.
Exactly. What I will do is tell you, I'm going to keep you informed when I do know information. And you've got to kind of earn back trust. And you're not going to earn it if you sort of misrepresent things or you obfuscate on something. But you also have to be careful, to the point about lawyers. Like, there may be things that you see in development and you can't get into it. And you have to say, there are some things that, we're working on, and I don't have all the information, so I'm not going to share it yet. But yeah, it is a really, it's a balance you have to strike, I think, between communicating and reassuring.
And I also love the implicit lesson in there that when you were earlier in your career and on the receiving end of choices that one day later you might be on the giving end of, I almost heard this like inner note taker, this inner anthropologist that was trying to figure out, what am I experiencing now? How do I learn lessons about what to do and what not to do? And I think that's generalizable. I mean, every bad boss is an instructor on something, and the good bosses too, obviously.
Yeah, no, I love the inner anthropologist. I mean, if folks out there aren't doing that, what are you doing? Because take note. I mean,
totally, the world's giving you data. All right, so now let me ask a Stripe question, which is, Stripe has a reputation for being one of the best run companies. I mean, again, not to burn your ears, but to burn your ears. And a lot of that happened under two circumstances, at least from this outside respecter, observers, we don't have any business relationship with Stripe. Like maybe it powers like my son's like side project website, is number one is obviously a lot of that growth happened during great economic times for doing what Stripe was doing. And number two, with a reputation for doing some things differently. Like I remember when Greg Brockman, when he was there, wrote some posts about open email within Stripe, how anybody could read anybody else's email, and just wondering with curiosity, not skepticism. I was like, wow, that sounds really cool. And also it sounded savvy. It like wasn't one of those bullshit things that people put out where it's like, like Valve, any employee can decide to do anything. It's like, okay, except when to launch their next game. So like it felt like it had enough limitations that it was real. And I just wonder, distinctive approach and good economic times, as that org scaled, what did you have to resolve as economic times worsened, and or as some of the practices that worked at a company of 20, 50, 100, or even 500 stopped working, if any, as you scaled?
No, I would say it was actually more the latter, which is as you get to certain sizes, some of the practices, not everyone can see everyone's email, like even just not humanly possible.
Totally.
If you did after a certain point, though I was impressed with some early employees who were reading quite far into our future. But I would say that, on the Stripe, yes, we certainly benefited from a really big growth environment. But part of why I chose to go to Stripe was that it's a company that's working on an infrastructure product, right? It's critical no matter what conditions you're in. If you're betting on technology, if you're betting on the internet, which I've definitely been betting on now for about 20 years. And I think that we benefit when our users benefit, and different users, by the way, through the economy, some sectors are doing better than others. And we are lucky enough to be working with such a wide diversity of customer that we kind of see it all. And we ideally, they're growing and we're growing, and sometimes they're growing less, but I like that aligned incentive. But I certainly think it's a different environment now that I welcome, which is, every company has to be more fiscally responsible. Money was cheaper. It's not, cost of capital has gone up, Roy, right? Like, and so everybody has to lead differently. And Stripe is pretty introspective and pretty aware. Like we think a lot about the macro environment, and we benefit from it. And we don't always, sometimes we don't, but we mostly have. But I think in terms of company practices, being distinctive really comes from thinking from first principles, thinking about what kind of culture and values. I think this comes from the founders. Often young companies are really a mirror to their founders. And my job coming in was to say, like, all right, let's interpret what you're looking for here and actually build it into our practices. Because early on, it's sort of osmosis, right? It's 40 people in a room. They're making all the decisions. They're sort of trying these ultra transparent ways of sharing information. By the way, not because transparency was the value. The value was make better global decisions locally. Right? Optimize for the best thing for the company. And so I would just say that value system of optimizing for Stripe and for the customer has persisted. Having transparent email has not persisted.
As a tactic.
It doesn't scale. A tactic.
I mean, the thing I love about, and it sounds like the book is an example of this, and so I'll look forward to reading it. The thing I love about wise leadership is how self-correcting it is. You know, that a lot of it is like, okay, we tried this, but no sacred cows, and let's figure out what was the underlying reason we were doing it, and tinkering as you go, because none of us are smart enough to know how any of these things are really going to unfold. I mean, you know, if I did not have pandemic on my dance card or 2 bank runs.
I know. But what we do, go back to anthropology, is we're pattern matching off of what we've seen. We're looking at what's worked. We're thinking, how do we advance and evolve what's working? By the way, this is exactly what you do after a state of disruption, which is you think, okay, what do I know works? How do I go back to that?
Totally.
And I think my book is, how do I go to fundamentals? Good leadership, good management, secure the foundation so that you can live another day. Right?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, in part because as a reader, I feel like the business world, and you know, we can go on forever. We're going to wrap in a minute, but I wanted, you know, I'm always curious why people write things. As a reader, I'd say that high output management has been one of these standing texts of like business fundamentals for a long time.
Yes.
And it has some great stuff in it, obviously, like complete canonical management thinking. And I think it's kind of awful because it perpetuates this mentality of fear and of top-down driven decision making and a bunch of things that, you know, we just as a society need to reinterpret. And if Andy Grove were CEO of Intel now, he'd probably be doing things differently than he did then. You know, so it's not a knock on him. It's more times evolve.
There's a little bit more of the management versus the worker.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
And I do think, I mean, I'm a collaborative leader. I believe that is what succeeds. Whether that in the past, maybe that model wasn't as popular, but today.
Totally.
Well, I appreciate you saying that because I
we
really
need a new text.
Well, we certainly got to keep OKRs around. Thank you, Andy Grove. But I do hope that we can advance some of the thinking on how to lead from behind, I guess, and that's I'm very comfortable with that. I think that's going to end up with a better product in the end.
Awesome. Well, here's to much more of that. Any parting thoughts before we wrap?
No, I just really appreciate the chance
No, it's great.
You. Thank
you. And so if people want the book, it's here. And for those of you who are here for the first time, the reason we call it This Is Not Advice is because of that thing about self-reflection is neither of us knows what you should be doing in your particular circumstance, just sharing our own experiences and stories, and you'll be your own inner anthropologist and figure it out. If you want to see this and past episodes, you can go to thisisnotadvice.org. And if you prefer short form audio, you can try one of our portfolio companies, Jam. If you just go to jam.ai and search for This Is Not Advice, you can find short versions, and this one will be up there soon too. So Claire, thank you. And whenever you have more you want to share, come back and, you know, bring Tammy from your team. You know, we know where the wisdoms emanate from, and to be continued.
Thank you, Roy.
Thank you.